Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Shegun Ajadi Bakari.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to speak to you today in Lisbon to share the vision of His Excellency the President for Isozima Yasimbe, President of Togolese Republic, on the subject of electrification. We have come to tell you why and how we want to provide electricity for all in Togo by 2030. And I am only the spokesperson of a delegation that will be happy to meet you to further discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to commend Honorable Minister Abli Bidamon, Minister of Energy of Togo, and Mr. Thiem, Director General of Togo Renewable Energy and Rural Electrification Agency, for their vision and leadership in defining such a forward-looking vision for Togo, as well as thank all our long-standing partners, especially IFC, represented by Pep Bardouille and Yann Tendrez. Thank you for your help and support. I also thank the SE4All team for giving us this opportunity to share the Togolese vision of electricity for all by 2030 and hope that it's just the beginning of a long-term partnership. Electrification stems first and foremost from a political vision, for it is political vision that shows us the way forward. In countries where access to electricity has always been provided by the public sector and through grid extension, a change in approach can only happen if it comes from the uppermost echelon of the state. In Togo, it was the president's vision that radically shifted this paradigm in 2017. Yes, we have made tremendous progress over the 10 years up until that point, but Togo's rate of electrification was only 37%, and only 7% of rural households have access to electricity. If we continue that way, we would not have reached full access by 2050. Based on that realization, President Ford decided to change the way we approach electrification, combining all solutions, namely grid extension, mini-grid, and solar kits, would enable us to reach our goal of electricity for all by 2030. It was also the President's conviction that we work to involve the private sector in Togo electrification policy. We therefore created the Agency of Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy. Its Director General, Mr. Thiem, is here today. Indeed, for us, electrification and rural electrification needs to be done differently and mainly with renewable energies. We start our alternative electrification plan from scratch. We need to create a market for decentralized electricity services, and by doing so, show the world and Africa that it is indeed possible to achieve full electrification at an accelerated pace through capitalizing on state-of-the-art technologies and through partnering private sector actors toward an effective delivery at scale. We needed to be convincing domestically but also internationally with funders and donors. And this is where, more often than not, there is the most hesitation. Once the grand speeches and long reports have been said and written, some development players continue to believe that by staying our current course we will succeed. The reality is that this free-for-all, pure grid policy has reached its limits and will not allow us to achieve the goal we have collectively set for 2030. This is why in 2017, we launched the CISO Presidential Initiative to electrify 300,000 households by 2022 by using individual solar kits set up entirely by private operator. Since the political will is to make solar kits an integral part of our electrification policy, we have built Togolese technical specification based on the widely recognized Lighting Global standard together with after-sales services model. We have also set up operational incentive, working with the post office for kit transportation and warehousing, for example, and tax incentive to attract private operator to the Togolese market. This is how, following a call of tender, we attract B-Box, which began its operation in Togo in December 2017, and in less than 3 months had installed more than 1,000 solar home systems. Because we know the success of this policy is contingent on local funding, we introduced B-Box to local banks, which were able to raise a $4 million AGF guaranteed loan at the start of operation. Here, I would like to thank Mr. Bikpo for his and his organization support. In 2017, we also built and commissioned Togo's first 4 solar mini-grid financed by YMU Commission to test and understand the technology. As you can see, the presidential vision is translating into tangible action. We need and want to go fast for the well-being of our people and to support the overall development of our economy. But we need and want to go even further and faster. Electrification requires a clear strategy that combines different solutions and include various stakeholders. This is our view, the only way to realistically achieve universal access by 2030. We know that even in a country as small as Togo, it will be impossible to electrify an entire country by 2030 using only one technical solution, only one actor, or only one financing model. This is why the Agency for Rural Electrification, with the support of IFC, has spent the last 6 months drawing up our electrification strategy. This is no longer about politics. Rather, it is about determining the most cost-efficient technology for each of Togo's 3,000 non-electrified areas, taking into account a variety of parameters, including residential demand, potential productive demand, proximity to the grid, and population density. This is not an ideological segmentation, and it does not favor one solution over another. Rather, if it offers the best combination to take us to our goal of electricity for all by 2030. It's also explore and propose business models that leverage the private sector strength to allow us to deliver at scale. We will be presenting this combination in Lomé, hopefully in June, and we hope to welcome many of you for the official announcement of our strategy. Without giving away too much detail, I can tell you that 60% of new connection by 2030 will be done through off-grid solution in Togo. As you can see, our new strategy gives a central role to off-grid solution, for which we count on the private sector to both invest and deliver. We aim to create an attractive environment for solar home system provider to strive and enable mini-grid business model through well-structured public-private partnership. But we will not stop there. Like everywhere in Africa, there is a real gap between an electrical grid coverage of an area and the actual electrification of the household in that area. This is why we want to run a vast grid densification program, without which we estimate that there will be 400,000 Togolese households living below the grid without electricity in 2030. To this end, We are also looking at innovative business models that combine all technologies across both public and private sector. In essence, we are shifting our society's approach to electrification from sole public provision to an approach that is much commercial. But relying on commercial approach to provide a public service for everyone also implies tackling a viability gap. The issue is partially addressed by reducing such gap as much as possible through defining a segmentation that aims to provide every part of the country the level of electricity services it really needs. And we expect this segmentation to evolve as need evolves. But we will probably also need to tackle this issue by helping the private sector to viably deploy this solution for a majority of our people, and also through supporting directly the poorest of our citizens. President Ford believes that electrification and seeing through the execution of our strategy must be done with the utmost transparency. There needs to be accountability for the resources used and efforts made, and for all the relevant technologies. This is why we plan to set up a national digital platform to make all new connections and electrified households visible in real time. Every one of you here will be able to follow the implementation of our strategy, and we will collect precious information on household behaviors so we can provide a better service to consumers. To demonstrate our ability and commitment, we have divided our strategy into 3 phases: demonstration, acceleration, and consolidation. Our goal for 2020 is to demonstrate to the international community that it is possible to achieve electricity for all by 2030. For this, by 2020, we plan to develop at least 60 mini-grid, solar mini-grid in public-private partnership mode, equip 100,000 households with solar kits, and connect more than 100 households to the national grid, of which 80,000 via densification of the grid. During this phase, we also plan to strengthen the regulatory environment to encourage private investment in the electrification sector. All this will be clearly presented at the Investor Day event we are planning in Lomé in June, and again, we hope to welcome as many as you there as possible. To end, let me say that this is not just about access to electricity. For with access to electricity comes development and economic growth. It leads to the creation of productive jobs and incentivize young Africans to remain in rural areas in order to transform our agricultural sector by offering them a better quality of life. Access to electricity for all, as President Ford likes to say, means access to prosperity for all. And whether we are talking about electricity or prosperity, it's our duty to make sure no one is left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shegun Bakari. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator for our next session, James Irungu Mwangi, followed by our panelists, Andrew Herscowitz, Felix Bikpo, Kristina Skierka, Nthabiseng Mosia, and Philippe Miquel. Welcome.
Hello. As said before, my name is James Irungu Mwangi. I'm Executive Director of the Dalberg Group. And I'm excited, honored, and humbled to be your guide and moderator through this discussion on electricity for all in Africa. I cannot think of a better lead-in than that provided by Shegun Bakari just now in terms of how Togo has gone about the very practical process of thinking through the full range of solutions that can be used to bring electricity to all and bringing them to bear. And I think in the conversation with the panel today, we will explore different aspects of how you can build that picture across the continent. So without further ado, I'll jump into the questions. And the goal here is to have a little bit of a conversation amongst ourselves, hopefully get to some spirited debate, and eventually involve you all in that as well. And so with that, Nthabiseng, I'll start with you. As a co-founder and CFO at Azimuth, you've been experiencing success bringing solar energy to Sierra Leone. Usually when we talk about decentralized solutions, etc., a lot of the action is in East Africa, where I'm from. What's been the experience as a South African, as a woman, building out an innovative new business in Sierra Leone, and how is that being received, and what's the impact on the ground?
Yeah, first of all, very happy to be here. I think this is a very important and pressing topic. Obviously, a large proportion of the off-grid population is in Africa, so it's a very urgent and pressing matter. I think our journey as a startup in Sierra Leone has been quite interesting. We emerged, I think, as part of the second wave of off-grid solar companies at a time when the market was changing. So I think Africa is not a country, but if you look at the off-grid solar sector, you would think it's kind of concentrated in, Africa is just East Africa, whereas the majority of the off-grid population is in West and Central Africa. And when we emerged, I think there was an appetite to move westward, to think about different markets and go wider, and to start thinking about businesses that were looking at those markets. That being said, Sierra Leone is not a sexy market. It's very unconventional. And I think there were a number of factors about Sierra Leone that has made it quite interesting to start a business. I think the one is, compared to a lot of sort of the markets where a lot of action is happening, Sierra Leone, the need is, I think, quite pressing. So about 90% of people in Sierra Leone don't have access. In rural areas, only 1% have access. If you look at markets like Guinea and Liberia, those numbers are just as stark. These are post-conflict nations, so a lot of the grid infrastructure was destroyed during the Civil War, and it's going to take a while to rebuild, and so off-grid is going to be an integral part of the solution. I think you also had a situation where we realized people were spending, just because it was a low-income country, people were still spending a large proportion of their income on stopgap lighting, and so we felt there was a market need, that the market was sizable. And then I think lastly, really we saw that there was no one really tackling this challenge. There was no competitors operating at scale, and the policy environment was quite conducive. So the Sierra Leonean government was the first African government to sign the Energy Compact with the UK government, and there were a number of policy incentives to make it easier for us to focus on core business and really de-risk us coming in as a startup. I think also when we emerged, there was also another interesting change kind of systemically in the off-grid sector, whereas you had a lot of vertically integrated players that started the sector. There was also a move towards focusing on specialized parts of the supply chain, and we knew pretty early on that we wanted to focus on distribution and consumer financing. And so I think there was really an appetite for looking at tailored solutions to markets that were unconventional.
So that was the thinking at the beginning.
Yeah.
Now you're on the journey. What's the journey like? What surprised you? What's panning out of the expectations as you set off?
Yeah, so I think it's been quite an interesting journey. Definitely a lot of thinking and tailoring the solution to challenges as they emerge. I think we've been able to gain a decent amount of traction to date, largely because we have a very customer-centric model. We also think about distribution quite differently. So we realize that if you're going to be operating in West Africa, you have to be thinking about cash, right? And the models that emerged in East Africa were all mobile money driven. And so when we were speaking to anybody, the moment you say you're thinking about cash in a pay-as-you-go solar model, people kind of turn away and shut off. But it has been an interesting way of thinking about how to do the business. So we start off by offering entry-level solar lanterns and allow customers to upgrade to larger solar home systems. And because we price these entry-level lanterns on a pay-as-you-go basis at a price point that almost anyone can afford, we achieve a high level of density in target communities. Our agents are interacting with customers on a daily basis, and so we actually have a much stronger customer relationship than what you're seeing amongst the companies that kind of do like a roving agent model. And so I think a challenge of working in the market has actually been a benefit in how we think about our business model and how we think about distribution. By no means is last mile distribution easy, but you know, it's definitely been an iterating process and constantly responding to the market needs, as Dalberg.
So I'll segue from that notion that you can go with, you know, cash in pay as you go, a high touch distribution model. That challenges some of the underlying assumptions of how energy inclusion works. And I'll come to you, Philippe, because at ENGIE, you know, there's a lot of other assumptions people make, that when you're on a stage like this, you're either going to be talking about off-grid or on-grid. You're going to be talking large scale or household scale. And yet, across your portfolio of activities and initiatives within ENGIE, and I know you lead their West and Central Africa business, you see elements of each of those coming to play. Would love to hear your reflections on how you view, you know, how do you find coherence in that, in playing in all of these different angles?
Well, I think all the solutions are a continuum between off-grid to on-grid. And I thought the talk from the counselor of President of Togo was extremely insightful, because a few years ago, not to say last year, the talks would have been very different. And for Western and Central Africa, as you mentioned, the solution was the grid and nothing but the grid, because people thought everybody needed to be connected, hence the only solution is the grid, and everybody needs to pay the same price for power, hence the only solution is the grid. The thinking has evolved drastically, understanding that the least cost option is actually a mix between off, mini, and on-grid, and there are areas which are too dense and too close to the grid not to take the grid. There are on the other extreme areas which is not dense enough and way too far, and the only solution is upgrade. And in between, mini-grid solutions are the one that are the most cost-effective. So we did recognize that at ENGIE, and we did significant moves. We just acquired Felix at the end of last year, at the end of 2017. One of the large off-grid players. We also developed our own mini-grid solutions called Power Corner. We have 8 mini-grid that are installed in Tanzania. We have a program for another 23 to be installed. So for us, and I'm again pleased to see that the thinking is evolving.
Yeah.
Africa cannot afford, Sub-Saharan Africa cannot afford not to go through the least cost options. And the least cost options is that continuum between off and on-grid.
Great. That's a continuum. You've described the continuum in terms of within a particular population or country at a point in time. I wonder if it's also a continuum over time. And do you see a migration over time from one solution to the next? And how do you think about that? There's a temporal as well as a physical continuum.
Well, where are we coming from as a large utility? What we're used to is to operate large power plants that were feeding a network that was feeding customers.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in the most mature market is the system going backwards. It is our customers that are more and more themselves producing their own power.
Yeah.
Through rooftop solar, through the reuse of their waste to produce biogas, through small windmills. And they're feeding themselves, they're feeding the networks. So we need to understand when they're doing so, when they need additional power, and our job has evolved drastically. It's the world of smart meters, the world of smart grids, the world of big data. And we think the system is not going backwards. It won't go back to large plants feeding networks, feeding customers. And the translation of that in Africa is definitely solar home systems. Customers are themselves producing power.
Yeah.
So yes, and of course in Africa, the needs are such that all the solutions will be part of the mix. And there's no point in opposing one solution to the other. But indeed, in terms of timing, I think that evolution will also happen in Africa. More and more, it's going to be our customers who are producing their own energy needs.
Great. Felix, you lead the Africa Guarantee Fund, and I think you sit at an interesting point in this whole discussion. The whole question of productive use on the one hand and economic activity through energy is one specifically around small and medium-sized enterprises. At the same time, the vast majority of players providing access to electricity in Africa are small and medium-sized or small and growing businesses themselves. How do you reflect on that and the role of the African Guarantee Fund in essentially bringing the SME to the center of the energy narrative in Africa?
Thank you, James. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. I think to answer to your question, I just want to say a few things regarding the African Guarantee Fund. The SME business is crucial. All of that is about, I think, development. And we strongly believe that the SME are not playing the role of development, we're in trouble. But if you look at, really, there is a strong correlation between this development and the fact that these SME are facing affordable energy and quality of energy. Today, if you look at the environment, you'll see that, yes, SME are using more energy, but we are also, as you can see here, a good energy providers. The issue is how to scale up your business to be able to provide a larger quantity of energy to everybody. Why? Because of access to finance. Access to finance is key. Access to finance because those who are providing the finance, I'm talking about in Africa, the money is in the hand of the banking system. How do you give them the comfort that they need to be able to provide the finance to this type of business? And more importantly, how do they understand the business? You know, it's a new business. Talking about energy business, talking about green energy is, even yourself, I don't know if you know what it means, really.
Yeah.
We need to understand the type of risk associated to this business for them to provide. This is what we are doing. So we're trying to let them understand that this is how the business works, this is the risk metric attached to this business, and more importantly, if you don't do that today, your business of tomorrow will die. This is basically what we're trying to do, and we created for that specifically at AGF what we call the Green Guarantee Facility with the support of the Nordic Development Fund to be able to provide all this comfort that I'm talking about to the financial sector in Africa on the benefit of this SME.
Great. So that conceptually resonates, but I'm very curious, particularly having heard Mr. Bakari talk about your role in Togo. How does this actually play out in that real life instance? So what role did you play in helping, and are you playing in the case of a country like Togo in terms of making the system work?
My job is very easy.
Yeah.
You need money, you come to see me. I go to see.
Can I?
You come to see me. I go to see a bank, and I tell the bank, look, this business makes business sense.
Yeah.
This business, the risk is ABCD. Together, let's see if you can assess the risk properly. If you're happy with that, it makes business sense. I give you the comfort for the future. The performance rate is not involved. For the future, I give you this comfort. And also, I give you, I bridge what I call the knowledge and skill gap for you to be easily assessed. That's what's happening in Togo with this business. We came for the first time. The banking system does not understand at all what is that. We say, guys, come. This is what it's about.
Yeah.
And we support you. We give you the comfort, and together we provide the financing to this Togo. That's what we are doing for each African country when it comes to green business.
And is the expectation that you continue to play that role into the future, or do you essentially put yourself out of a job once they understand the market?
I have a job for another 20 years, don't worry. But today, strategically, because of the importance of energy is for Africa one of the major obstacles for their development. So it's part of our strategy. 20% to 30% of our portfolio, our financing is going to energy, especially for green energy. So if my equity increase, I still have a job, don't worry. I'm still here.
Great. Kristina, earlier I learned that your last name, Skierka, means spark that starts the flame in Polish. And your role at Power for All, working with governments, civil society, and business to actually drive decentralized solutions, probably puts you in the business of sparking a whole range of flames. What's been the observation about getting these actors to work together? What stands in the way? What has been the key to kind of getting them to move into shared action?
That's a great question. And for those who aren't familiar with Power for All, we're a global campaign that's working with over 200 partners, largely in the energy poor countries themselves, to really accelerate the transformation of the energy system, largely by focusing on decentralized renewables. So I guess, this question about how do you spark or catalyze that cooperation? Well, I guess the good news is that it's there. It's in some places very nascent, but the truth is that there's no one right solution to end energy poverty. And what it is it's going to be a mix of solutions, which means a mix of players who have to work together to figure out a new way forward. And in the same way, we heard from the opening speaker a little bit about how important political vision is from the top. It's just as important from the bottom up. And so really trying to harness those forces is a big piece of what we do. I would say that a vision is a critical piece, and we published some research last year about how important it is to have specific targets and a real commitment from top leadership in countries. But beyond that, I think it really is creating forums and ways for people to work together, in particular what we consider the energy access ecosystem. So that includes the utilities themselves, it includes governments, CSOs, the companies, consumers, and in fact media. And that last piece a lot of people often overlook, but it's been, I think, really critical to getting some of the changes that we saw also in Sierra Leone. We have a very active campaign presence there. But things like setting up the Energy Revolution Task Force in Sierra Leone, or the Decentralized Renewable Energy Task Force in Nigeria with the help of SOJ and USAID, has been really critical to create those forums and accountability. That's accountability among peers who all share that same vision of how to, one by one, knock down the problems that are stopping the next phase of energy access.
Great. As you reflect on that, where is it that it doesn't, can you give us a sense of where people are typically misunderstanding each other across sectors? Because in a sense, it's great to talk about how it should work. It may be more useful to understand where it most typically isn't working.
Well, and so there's a whole bunch of ways I could answer that question, but I think maybe the most pertinent to this panel is looking at the future of integrated energy planning. And when you look at that as a scenario, think about how we do our energy planning right now in any country. And it starts with load forecasting. And I know that's a really sexy topic, right? Like, really. But the truth is that there's a big gap in communication there in terms of being able to see decentralized and centralized at the same table, and really understanding how we can figure out including decentralized as part of baseload. And so in that sort of more technical area, there's a real need, which we'll be convening shortly, called Utilities 2.0, a real need to get these different forces in the energy sector working together. So it's not even a misunderstanding, it's just a gap in information. And I think you could say that across any one of these parts of the access system that don't really yet function as a collective whole.
Great. Andrew, since Power Africa was started, 50 million people, you claim 50 million people have now gotten access to electricity in Africa, in part through the efforts of Power Africa. More importantly, you've been involved now in something like 90 deals. That's a lot of transactions. That's a range of exposures to the realities of getting stuff done. What are the big lessons learned from that experience to date in terms of both what's been achieved and, more importantly, what could be achieved in the future?
So thank you. Am I on? So I'm going to speak extra loud because I think a lot of the people who need to hear the message, the acoustics aren't great in the building, so people can hear whatever we're saying from the plenary floor right now. We've learned quite a bit. I think the key message that we have to remember is that I think a lot of people, including ourselves, people in this room, is we become overly principled, and it's at the expense of getting people access to electricity. Our number one principle should be getting people access to electricity. Why? So they don't die. Why? So they emerge from poverty. And why do we want to do this? We do it in a way that won't destroy the environment, because if we do it that way, then we all die. That's it. Get people access to electricity. So the other principle that we have to remember is work quickly. And what we're doing, we have sustainable energy for all. But let me tell you what's not sustainable, and we're all guilty of this. Distorting the market. We do it again and again. Development partners do it, multilateral banks, we're distorting the market without thinking through the implications of doing that. And I'll give you examples of it. As long as we go into it, eyes wide open, we look at things like scaling solar. I'll talk about that. I love scaling solar, but it distorts the market. And it's, in some ways, it's having positive impacts, it's having negative impacts. Two, we create a false sense of success amongst businesses. We give a lot of subsidies. They think things are going great. Everybody wants to report on the results, but really the business isn't going as well. That's not sustainable. Three, we saddle governments with sovereign debt. That's not sustainable. Four, we offer solutions that we want to offer as opposed to what the market demands. So many of us have in our mind what we should be offering as opposed to letting the market say, this is what we think we can provide. Because the most successful solutions we've seen have been from companies like, I saw Tomas from Mobisol walk in, companies in the off-grid, in the solar home system space, where they've been completely unregulated, and they provided some of the greatest solutions that others can learn from. And then five, this is the biggest problem that we have to solve, is thinking that we're in the business of selling electrons. We've got to get away from that thought space, and this is what the solar home system companies are realizing. Everyone talks about mini-grids and microgrids, think we're going to solve all of this by selling electrons. You're not going to have a sustainable business selling electrons as a mini-grid. You're going to have to figure out how to cross-subsidize that in some way, whether it's through leasing of appliances or bundling services or doing something else. Because on the one hand, we're trying to get people access to electricity, things like that, and improve energy efficiency. But as those appliances become more and more efficient, the demand for electrons goes down, which means your bottom line goes down. So you have to think about your business model differently. I'm going to talk a little bit about distortion of the market, because I mentioned scaling solar, which, let me be very clear, we support it entirely, and we put money into it. But here's where it's causing a problem. When you see a headline saying that there's 5-cent solar in Senegal, or 6-cent solar in Zambia, or 5 or 6 cent solar in Ethiopia because of scaling solar, and all you see is the headline, and you're a power minister, and your president or finance minister has seen that headline, they turn to you and say, why can they get solar at those prices and I can't? There are a lot of reasons why, and we all need to do a better job explaining how do you get to that point, and also realizing you can't get that in every country. With scaling solar, the IFC helps prep the package, they pay for studies, they run the tender, some provide financing. There are tax waivers involved in some countries, there's site being provided. I'm sorry, but in Nigeria, you are not going to get 6-7 cent solar right now, and it's not bankable. And you've got 14 IPPs that are ready to deliver power. And people can say, go ahead and compete it now, but you're going to lose 3 years. Without factoring in the lost GDP that you're going to experience, the fact that you're going to lose industrial clients who are going to start producing their own power, who are your best paying customers. So people need to stop being so principled, and they need to start working quickly to actually get deals across the finish line.
Is it a case of the perfect being the enemy of the good, in a sense?
Absolutely. I see it happening again and again, and it's the most frustrating experience, because I feel like we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Every time we do something good, we advertise it, but we never tell everybody what the bad is.
Yeah. So you threw out a couple of things there, Andrew, that I'm actually keen to reflect back in some ways. And Philippe and Nthabi, both of you are in the business of selling electricity. How do you respond to that question around the inevitable tension between efficiencies and selling just pure electricity? How is that reflected in your models? Maybe Nthabi, you can start. Philippe, I'd love to hear your thoughts next.
Yeah, so I think for us, we see solar as the gateway or the entry point.
Yeah.
So we really are distributing and financing a range of lifestyle products that are enabled by pay-as-you-go technology. And so thinking about how do we keep our agents continually incentivized and make sure that they have a sustainable pipeline of products, in addition to making sure that customers are moving up the energy ladder, but also thinking about complementary products. So I think the benefit of actually doing consumer financing is you have a whole set of data on customers who were previously unbanked and who couldn't access, kind of traditional loans from banks. And so we see that as being as integral to our business model as the solar, right? And so for us, we have a customer lifetime vision of solar products, but then also thinking about financial products, so agricultural insurance or health insurance, school fees loans, complementary lifestyle products. And so, we're not thinking about per electron, and energy efficiency is good, right? And also if the cost of providing these appliances is going down, we see it as good for business, and thinking about how do we continually finance and refinance these customer loans.
Right. Philippe, the aspect around the pricing expectations among governments, you've just done the 60 megawatt plant in Senegal. Are you seeing that dynamic playing out in your experience, the dynamic Andrew is mentioning around the perfect being the enemy of the good?
Well, actually, ENGIE just won scaling solar in Senegal at a rather low price indeed. So I'm not going to debate with Andrew on the benefits of a program like that or not.
I love the program, but maybe you can talk about all of the incentives so that governments know that if they want to get this price, the incentives that go into getting to that price point.
But I think, Andrew, what we need to do, I think scaling solar, as long as it's providing opportunities to develop renewable power in countries of Sub-Saharan Africa, it's always good. Then you need to educate people as to, indeed, why have we reached that very low point in Senegal, and why you won't be able to do that in Nigeria. And one reason is in Senegal you have a very strong off-taker. The risk of not being paid is hence removed from your pricing, something that simple, which is absolutely not the case in Nigeria. And I think you need to educate people rather than argue whether the program is good or bad. And another point on education is the same thing. I think Andrew is right in saying that the business model has changed completely. We're not selling electrons. We're selling access to electricity. It's very different. The business model that we have for most of the solar home systems is appliances plus access to electricity. The beauty of that model is because the system has a very small load, your appliances need to be extremely efficient. So it's a very robust model whereby you combine the use of the power and the supply of the power. But again, you need to educate people on that. One example, you know how much it costs to charge your phone in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Western Africa. Cost about 100 francs CFA. That's 15 euro cents. That's very affordable. Everyone will tell you 15 euro cents. That's very affordable. But the battery of your phone is 5 watt hours. 5 watt hours. So 15 euro cents for 5 watt hours is 20,000 euros per megawatt hour. That's no longer affordable. So when you install a solar home system in a country of Western Africa, most of the authorities are telling you, but you're selling the electron at 20,000 euros per megawatt hour. We can't have people paying that much money. Yet the 15 euro cents is what people are paying for, and that's affordable. The thinking needs to change in that respect. Andrew is right. We're no longer saying selling in those models. We're no longer saying electrons, but access to power, which is very different.
Great.
You're actually selling access to services. So, I wrote a blog on this where I did a side-by-side comparison of a person who would be grid connected in Kenya versus someone using a solar home system in Kenya, and what you would, if you do the math. If a person's going to get a cell phone charger, some light bulbs, an electric razor, and a television, and they're able to finance it over a 2-year period, it ends up costing them less money, and they're more likely to be able to do it than if they get connected to the grid. When you look in Kenya, where they connected 3 million people, but 1 million people weren't paying for power because they couldn't afford to go out and buy a television. But if you say, I will give you all of these things over a period of time, suddenly, shockingly, They can afford it. It's because the solar home system companies have figured it out. And
It's a bundle.
you've got 2 utilities that are solvent on the entire continent.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. People need to think differently from a business perspective.
Yeah.
Learn from the solar home system companies.
This notion of getting people to real apples to apples comparisons, in a sense, strikes me as something the public, private, and social sector actors all need to get to, so that you're actually making fair comparisons. How much of that is featured in the work that you're doing, Kristina, in terms of engaging these actors so that they understand how to think about the 6-cent tariff, or how to think about the bundles of services and capabilities being offered?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, because how many people really think about like 6 cents tariffs? I mean,
Yeah.
it's the experience of not being able to get what you want and not what you deserve. I mean, that's actually what's happening. And so, in terms of a deep education about what kerosene costs, for example, as opposed to decentralized, is that where you're going with this question? Or
Yeah, it's a question of, it sounds like what's needed is a much more nuanced and I think broad understanding of what people are discussing in different places, because we have a lot of shallow comparisons leading to bad decisions. And the question is, are we seeing a more nuanced understanding that you don't just pick one number in isolation absent context? You actually need to understand all of the context in which a number or an offering sits before you make a judgment on it.
I mean, I think it just is so different in every market.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that in terms of, is there still an inherent bias towards wanting grid-centric power, right? Yes, there is still a belief that somehow that is different or better, but yet the people who have grid power in many of the energy-poor countries suffer. They suffer from unreliable access, really poor quality, and so it sort of, in some ways, is solving itself. But I would say, no, there has to be a real education that decentralized renewable energy is actually premium power. It's some of the best power you can get out there, and by the way, it's affordable, and it fits in most people's power budgets that they've already set aside. And most people do believe in the energy ladder. We're still lacking, I think, really excellent data to show that that is a phenomenon, but I'm guessing all of my panelists believe that, and have seen in their own companies, that if you start with one product and you realize those benefits and you understand what it's like to have affordable, really high quality power that you control and you own, that you're going to want the next product and the next product. So I don't know if that's where you were heading. I'm not sure I got your question exactly, but I took advantage of getting my point across.
As one should.
Yes.
Felix, when Andrew was talking about the market distortions point, one thought I had is, I've seen guarantees work in a number of ways. The best version of a guarantee allows us to actually lower irrational fear of a market, build knowledge, get lenders experience, get borrowers engaged, and over time, let the market run on its own. A poorly structured guarantee can drive excessive flows of credit to uncreditworthy subjects, create debt loads, all manner of problems thereafter, and actually damage confidence in an industry if poorly structured, because eventually everything blows up. How do you make sure you are in the first category and not the second category? How do you know that you're in the first and not the second?
Generally speaking, for any business, if you have excess of guarantees, it's not a good business.
Yeah.
If you come to a financier and you ask me 100% of a guarantee, forget about the business, it's not good at all. Now, our job is not to come and try to promote bad energy business. No. We're trying to promote good business. Energy business has to be as good as any type of business. That's the basis. If it's not financially viable, the performance is not good, we don't go there. Because we are not an NGO, we are not coming to, let's say, try to reduce the cost of doing things. No, we're trying to promote the energy business as a good business. That's one. Secondly, we share the risk. By sharing the risk, those who are financing on first level are taking the same level of risk of us. So we will together be back in the same boat to make sure that we are the eligible one are the one who are coming out. That's what. Secondly, thirdly, the guarantee business shouldn't be adding the cost of the business, which we spoke a lot about availability, affordability of energy. If we don't play our role properly, such a way the cost of financing of this business is too high, the end borrower, the consumer will not be able to afford. So we need to play a role at where the cost of financing is acceptable to not add it up on the final pricing. So our role is to enable, not to kill the market.
Great.
And to protect the market instead of killing him.
Now, wanted to open up the floor for a couple of questions if there are any, and we'll need to be quick. Any questions or comments from the floor? I think you can make your way to the mics if you do have any.
I can't hear anything.
And in the meantime, if any of the panelists wish to pose questions or comments to each other, they're welcome to role model.
Can I do like that?
Sure, I'll put Andy on the spot. It's one of my favorite things to do. So, Andy, what's the future of Power Africa given the exciting times we're having in the United States?
So we just launched the Power Africa 2.0 strategy, and it goes to what we've learned. We have strong support in the current administration for Power Africa. And the reason why it's a private sector driven model, we really look at what the market's doing. But what our 2.0 strategy really looks at is, Power Africa, when it first was launched, we said we need to figure out how to get investors into the continent and make sure that private sector is willing to invest. Well, they're there. There are over 800 projects that we're tracking in Sub-Saharan Africa, real projects, ones that have been screened that any one of them could potentially get across the finish line. The problem is that you've got all of these stranded assets and potentially you're not going to have demand for all of this power. It's not that there's not demand. You have 600 million people who don't have access to electricity, but if you can't transmit the power to them, you're not going to be able to tap into that latent demand. So we're focusing more on transmission, on distribution, and also the enabling environment. A lot of these deals get stuck because either lack of capacity or there's not the right enabling environment to make sure that they move forward.
Fantastic. So just take the mic over there.
My name is Bahaj. I'm from the University of Southampton, UK. We had today graphs showing that we're not going to achieve electricity access, let alone energy access. And because we're all talking about electricity rather than energy, let's just get the question around electricity. So if we're not going to achieve that access, do you think that the business models that we have now are really fit for purpose? I don't think that having solar home systems financed as they are or grids financed as they are will achieve that access. And I think we should think about better business propositions to allow affordability to be at the heart of what we do here.
Great.
Thank you.
Business models fit for purpose?
Hi, my name is Mariama Kamara, Smiling Through Light, and we're also working in Sierra Leone. For me, I think when I look at the SDG 7, I'm also thinking about SDG 1 and just the global around ending poverty. I think in Sub-Saharan Africa, working there, a big challenge is on finance, but most of the finance is debt finance. For startups, it's a lot of debt finance. So how can the panel suggest ways, especially for SMEs, where you get that blended finance, and also for any financiers that's here, for people working on the continent, like local businesses, the finance is not literally going to organizations on the ground. If you look at financial flows, I think there's money, but for a local person from Kenya or Sierra Leone or Togo, they're not getting the money. So what are we missing out on? And if there's gaps to fill, can they tell us, okay, you guys are not doing this? Is it skills building they need there? What is going on? Because there's such a big problem, and I'm here being frustrated that we probably won't even meet the goals, and we've been working for years.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
All right. The business model question to our two operators, and then you will take the financing question.
Yeah, so I think for us, affordability and ultra affordability was actually a key thing. So we're operating in a market where you have a very low GDP per capita, and most people, financing a $150 to $200 home system is just prohibitive. And so that's why we thought about, the lanterns because we wanted to achieve high density in communities, but we also wanted to make a product affordable for all. And so we finance solar lanterns on a pay-as-you-go basis on a 4-month horizon. And so within a community of about 500 households, we're able to achieve density of 200 to 300. And most of our agents are servicing roughly 300 to 400 customers at a time. And so, and the benefit is if you get people kind of starting off with an entry-level lantern, they start to build a credit history, they start to realize the benefits of solar, they're saving compared to stopgap solutions. So batteries are more prevalent than kerosene in West Africa. And so they're starting to save, they're starting to see the benefits, and then if they pay really well, they get to upgrade. And so even before you're actually, I think for a lot of the solar home system companies, you start by selling a home system to somebody that you don't necessarily have a lot of credit history on. We're really looking at getting into as many people in the community and then only really upgrading people who have proven they have the credit worthiness. So that's one where we're seeing other models starting to emerge like that. It's one way of doing it. I agree, people need to think differently.
I'd love to get just a couple of more questions in, so I'll get
Can I make
Felix.
a comment on the business model really quickly, though? Because this thing is
Really quickly.
important. Yeah. So solar home systems are great. You still can't cook with a solar home system.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to come up with a business model, and it's happening with some of the companies where they're going to have to connect with whether it's LPG for cooking, work on the distribution side. But there is a future where people get their electricity from solar, the backup battery, and cooking from gas or some other cooking solution. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Your point on financing is correct, it's totally correct, but it's not just for you, it's general. Access to loan is easy, to debt is easy, but you cannot have access to debt if your financial position is not good. You need to have equity. That's why, for example, at AGF, what you're trying to do is to encourage a lot of private equity that exists in the world to invest into energy-oriented SME in Africa with our guarantee. That's new. We even provide them comfort for equity investment for you to be able to have access easily to the debt. That's one. The second thing is, even if you have your equity, you have access to your debt, we need to know that the financier understands that you understand how to manage your business. So we can provide to you also a capacity building to bridge these knowledge and skill gaps for you to be eligible to this financing. We have today more than 12% of our portfolio in that way. So if you want us to discuss, please feel free.
Thank you. We are right down to the wire, but the lady there has been standing at the mic for a while, so she will have the last question, and we will blend responses to that question with the last word from each of our panelists, please.
Thank you. My name is Anissa Krani, and I work for Danish Energy Management, and we monitor the projects supported by the European Union across Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. And some of the issues that we're seeing are around how to adapt business models that we have used in other countries to the specific contexts, particularly in Africa. For example, I believe ENGIE is struggling in Tanzania to adapt to the fact that market day happens once a week. 6 mills operate on that day and then don't operate for the rest of the week. Also that the ability of consumers to consistently pay is a major issue due to their inconsistent incomes. Do we have any ideas of kind of lessons we can share about business models that have addressed that and that therefore contribute to a stronger business model?
Yeah. Anyone want to take that?
It's a tough one.
No, the question is very relevant, and I'm going to try not to answer it because we should look at what the alternative is. And in everything we do, and we were talking about business models, we need to have that in mind. What is the next best alternative for people who are not connected to the grid? So yes, the business models need to be improved, and to answer the first question, we have solutions that really address the base of the pyramid. We're at about 15 to 20 euro cents today. We'll try to go lower than that in the future, but that's a beginning. And as far as mini-grid is concerned, yes, indeed, it's access to power at a higher cost than the grid. And so you need mechanism to help us, developers, lower our costs and go down to grid level. So it's really through dialogue with the authorities, with the lenders, with the developers, that this will happen. But again, what is for the specific villages in Tanzania the other best option? Certainly not to be disconnected for another 5 or 10 years.
If I could just add to that too, I think it's a great question. And again, it gets down to that topic of when are we counting decentralized renewable energy as actually part of an integrated energy system? And it's that gap in planning that is one of the things that needs to be addressed most urgently, because there's a whole new way of thinking about energy we haven't even gotten to yet, where these two kinds of generation can come together in a way that, you know, perhaps we can actually think about decentralized being a support to the grid. And maybe there's other ways where when it comes to those kinds of up and down demand cycles, we can use decentralized in a different way and take some of the pressure off the grid, which, by the way, isn't actually making anybody money for anyone anywhere when it comes to energy poor countries. So when you talk about business models, I don't think it's just about making money, because we've got a very distorted market, but it is about service. I think that's one of the themes coming from this panel. And it's also about thinking about integrated planning in a completely different way. This is a whole new future of energy.
So the key input for the successful business model is going to be is data. And this is why I love when ENGIE purchased Phoenix International. I thought that was such an absolutely brilliant business move. Because what Phoenix does is, while other solar home system companies are going and they're increasing the size of their panels, Phoenix has a 10-watt panel, and they collected a tremendous amount of data on the usage of their customers. And you need that data to figure out, you know, which are the days, you know, that they have usage. I know that Mobisol has a software platform also that others are interested in now to help track what the usage is. The people who really need this data are the utilities, the distribution companies. I see a potential solution. The problem is when a distribution company is told you have to connect 1 million people, and they just go and connect 1 million people without having any data about those people. That's an absolute recipe for disaster. It may be that a distribution company gets access to that same software, puts solar home systems in households for a year to collect data on people, can then map out where the paying customers are and when they pay, and say, maybe instead of running the grid here, we can run a microgrid in this community because these are paying customers. But you need that data, and I think data is going to help inform the most successful business models, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Fantastic. Any other? Well, the lights are flashing 0, 0. And I think, you know, we've covered quite a bit of ground. I think starting from the whole notion of a continuum of energy solutions, we heard it from the way that Togo is approaching it and in the discussion here, to the importance of pragmatism in really achieving electricity for all, really pairing solutions to the use cases and not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And then concluding with the critical importance of data and real informed decision making as we go forward in picking models for the future, and models that are in a sense future proofed, so that you're not working at cross purposes with the direction we want to take the market in. I think overall a very rich discussion, and I wanted to thank Nthabiseng Mosia, Philippe Miquel, Felix Bikpo, Kristina Skierka, and Andrew Herscowitz for being fantastic panelists and for really helping us deepen our understanding of this topic. And thank you to you all.